How's it? Aloha and welcome to Hotel Makiki. I'm Pastor Corey, and in this short video, I want to share with you about the second of 6 elementary teachings of Christ referred to in Hebrews 6, verses 1 and 2. It seems to be a common saying, you gotta have faith, but many times that statement has very little to do with faith in God. I'm sometimes afraid that faith in God sounds like something so simple that you miss the point, however. Do you have faith in yourself? Do you have faith in someone else? Like a parent or a friend, or maybe a particular skill or ability you have, or maybe even something you know or possess. Is that kind of faith the same thing as having faith in God? Let's see what God's Word says about faith in Hebrews 11, verses 1 through 6. Hebrews 11:1 starts out a little mysteriously because it compares faith to unseen things that we've all felt or experienced but perhaps never really talked about before. Things like a sense of assurance or conviction, feeling like we know something will be right or wrong, sometimes before we act, and always before the result of our words or actions are known. Verse 2 says this is how the Old Testament saints lived before the scriptures were revealed and written down. Verse 3 goes on, however, to speak of faith as a way of knowing things or understanding events for which there were no human witnesses, such as the creation of the universe, which Moses writes about but did not himself witness. Strangely enough, the statement here in verse 3 doesn't contradict modern science either, for as we learn more and more about the physical universe, we discover that smaller and smaller things, too small for the human eye to see unaided, actually compose and hold together everything that we can see. Verse 4 turns the reader's attention to Old Testament mysteries, like how did Abel know that God would be more pleased with an animal sacrifice than with the fruit of the ground, which his brother Cain offered to God in Genesis 4, verses 3 through 5. The second half of verse 4, and through his face, even though he died, Abel still speaks, seems cryptic at first, but I believe that it was Abel's act of faith, listening for God's voice, watching for his leading, and then acting according to what he could know of God, remains instructive to you and I today. Verse 5 touches on another Old Testament mystery, how a man named Enoch might one moment be living here on earth and the next moment be taken up to God, because before he was taken he was commended as having pleased God. Genesis 5, verse 20 to 24, where we find the Bible record of Enoch's life is equally mysterious at first, perhaps because we find no great exploits in Enoch's life. Rather, only that he had fathered Methuselah, the man credited with the longest lifespan, 969 years, and other sons and daughters. But then again, perhaps this is good news in that a life of faith includes such things as being a faithful husband and father. And that, at least in the case of Enoch here, this is why he was commended as having pleased God. Hebrews 11:6 says this, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. It seems worth looking at closely because it precedes a long list of people whom God found to be faithful, and summarizes the kind of relationship based upon faith that each of these Old Testament saints had with God. First, they didn't please God because of what they were or what they did, but because they had this thing called faith. For without faith, it's impossible to please God, right? Secondly, this faith speaks of a relationship based upon the belief that even though they might not have been able to see God with their own eyes, they believe that God exists. And thirdly, that even though none of them received their full reward while alive on this earth, see Hebrews 11, verse 39 and 40, know what I'm talking about, they died believing that God rewards those that earnestly seek him. Well, do you believe God exists? If you've been watching for God, maybe watching people who seem to know God, people in whose lives, work, and relationships God seems to reveal himself, do you know exactly what you should be looking for or even listening for? Do you believe that God rewards those that earnestly seek him? If you're someone who doesn't believe in the God of the Bible yet, here's a great hint for what to look for. Observe their life, work, and relationships. These are people who seem to love God and others as they love themselves. And then look for examples of unusual provision in terms of finances, healing, favor, or fruitful relationships. Look at what kind of legacy these people leave behind to their grandchildren or even beyond. Psalm 128 speaks of the blessings of those who fear the Lord in such a manner. What about those of us who do believe that God exists, or have come to the place where we can believe that God works in our lives through other people, or even through our own lives to bless our own circle of influence? While God's existence may be an undeniable fact to us, do we hold to the belief that God will reward us for our faith even if we don't see how or don't know when? Do you know someone who seemed to live and die with faith, and yet you can't discern where, when, or how they might have received a tangible reward in their lifetime? Not only has God determined to give each person a certain amount of faith, as it says in Romans 12 verse 3, but He's also determined that everyone who believes in Him would receive the fullness of their reward at the same time on a future day when everyone will see Him face to face. Do you believe that God is? Do you believe that God rewards those who earnestly seek Him? I sure hope so.